This podcast was sponsored by A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever and wherever you may be watching today. We welcome you to another edition of the Vicars Crossing podcast. The Vicars Crossing is a virtual space where faith intersects with the public square. And we are back. This is the Vicars Crossing COVID-19 edition, take 3. And it's Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's Church in London from my dining room. And I'm here with Kevin.
I'm here in my office because I like to get out of the house at least once in a while. St. Aidan's Church is where I hang out, and I'm glad to be here with Ian.
Oh, Ian, this is my bedroom. I hang out in my bedroom, and that's it. That's all I got.
We'll have a formal introduction later, but we also have Matthew.
Hey there, I'm down here in Houston, Texas, and excited to be a part of the conversation, guys. Looking forward to it.
All right, Matthew, so glad you could join us. And as Kevin said, we're going to get more of a formal introduction about you and what brings you to the Vicars Crossing today. I want to first say hi to our sponsor, of course, A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family owned and operated. And we are continuing, of course, our lockdown as best we can moving forward. I'm so glad we could have this opportunity to do the Vicars Crossing in a different way, which is nice. We're able to, get out of our little studio in the office. And the best part of it is we're able to connect with people like Matthew from different parts of the globe to be able to touch base and talk about different issues as well. So we're happy about that. So we wanted to just check in and see how everybody's making out. Last week we mentioned that Ian's a music student and just finished a first year of college. So how are you doing now, Ian, that you've had a whole week to kind of take a breath after a busy week?
I don't know. It's very... I finished my last exam and I was like, now what? Because usually I'd go like see friends and like hang out, but I kind of just was like, okay, cool. What now? What is there left to do? So I just been like fiddling around on my computer, making music and just kind of doing whatever feels right and just try like waiting until this whole thing is kind of over. Yeah.
Yeah, Ian's quite a musician. Just pick up your uke there and give us a little taste of what you played earlier.
Yeah, we were asking Ian to maybe come up with a new theme song for the Vicars Crossing. So what did you come up with?
This is definitely original and definitely my original music.
Probably not original, but not
at all. Not at all.
To all of you listening and watching, that intro music you heard on the way in, that is all Ian. Played, produced, the whole bit. So he's the man, the myth, and the legend.
So what's going on with the hat there, Kev?
Oh, well, this is my kufi. You like this? Are you familiar with Neil Peart of Rush, the drummer? He's gone now, God rest his soul. But this is the kind of hat he wore. So I got this one a little while ago, and for my bald head, it actually feels very comfortable and nice. How does it look, Rob?
I think it looks great. I was wondering if you're going to come by to paint the house or something when I first saw you wearing it. But Ian, what did you think of the hat?
I thought he looked like an egg holder just turned upside down.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, so.
Yeah, that's great.
What do you think, Matthew? You've not known me, but does this suit me?
Absolutely, sir.
So, good stuff.
Well, we do a little bit here, Matthew, on the Vicars Crossing where we want to make sure that, and it's a fan favorite. We want to check in with Ian every time we do a show, and because Ian really is the wealth of knowledge here in the broadcast. So this is a very special part of our Vicars Crossing podcast in which we ask our listeners to bring questions to Ian, and we call it Ask Ian. Anything.
Ooh.
Anything.
Anything. Well, Ian, we have a question today from Betsy,
Okay.
who is writing today. Sends her email and her love and best wishes to you. Obviously, she admires.
Aw.
Betsy is. I think she might be a bit smitten. Now that we've gone to this video format, you're starting to get a lot of love, man. There's something with your dimples. I don't know what it is, but the question is: during this time of COVID-19,
Yes.
you have been spending time with family. What has been your favorite activity to do with family, and what has been your most annoying activity with family?
So my favorite thing that I've done with my family is we played euchre. Like I've learned how to play euchre, and we played euchre, and my two brothers and my dad. And then we also we're watching the Marvel movies in like sequential order in the order of the storyline, which is something else we're doing, which is a lot of fun. As for annoying, I don't think there really is any because we're lucky enough to have sort of our own section of the house to just do our own thing. Like for me, it's in my room. My dad has kind of taken up the living room with his work, which is okay. You know, you gotta get your job done. He has like 3 monitors, and it's very Tony Stark. It's really cool. And yeah, so I don't know. I think the only part about it is the fact that I can't go see the people that I want to see, and that's the only part that's really annoying. Yeah.
It sucks.
Yeah. So.
What about you, Robbie? You got anything fun going on over there during COVID-19?
The family's well, which I'm always happy to report. Everybody's feeling good. I have 2 boys that are older, Matthew. One's 24 and one's 22, and they're still home with us. Just finished school, one of them, with not a lot of jobs prospects right now with everything going on. So it's funny because we were really not on top of each other because they stay up all night and go to bed at like 6 in the morning, and I get up about 6 or 7 o'clock, say hello, share a cup of coffee, and they disappear one end, and we continue. So it's quiet during the day, but a lot of gaming going on at night in our living room when all the friends get on and they spend time doing that. But no, everybody's in good shape. So okay.
Matthew, do you work from home now?
I do. I work from home. My wife and I, we have 3 small boys. And by the grace of God, about a year ago, I built an office in my backyard. I built a shed with a little air conditioning unit and a little heater. And so I do my work out behind the garage in my own little office. And then so my wife watches the boys in the morning during the quarantine.
Yeah.
And then normally at lunchtime here we switch. So she's handling the boys for just a little while longer, and then it's Dad's turn.
I bet.
Very good, very good. Well, Matthew, we are so glad that you could join us today and talk a bit about your book and some of your work. We'll get to that in a minute, but I want to give Kevin an opportunity just to please give a formal introduction of Matthew to our listeners. Kevin.
Yeah, so everybody, we're really thrilled to have Matthew today, and I all of a sudden this little thing leapt inside of me when he just said air conditioner, and I was thinking, oh, that would be nice to have to use right now. We're not into air conditioning just yet, but coming right at us from Fuller in Texas, Matthew Kaemingk is assistant professor of Christian ethics and the associate dean there, scholar in residence, teaches around Christian leadership. He also serves as a fellow for the Center for Public Justice, and his research and teaching focus on Islam and political ethics, faith, and workplace theology and culture, and reformed public theology. Most recently, I've gotten introduced to him via a book called Christian Hospitality and Muslim Immigration in an Age of Fear. Great book, and we're really glad to have Matthew with us. I just couldn't recommend a book enough. You're an incredible writer. It really captivated me. I read it in a day and a half, and I'm excited to get into a further conversation about it. So welcome to you, Matthew.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to this conversation, and thank you for the kind words.
Yeah, I didn't miss anything, did I? I probably missed because you do a whole lot of stuff.
You missed my middle name.
Which is a deeply held secret. It's
Yes.
not known outside of Seattle, Washington. It's only
That's right.
Under lock and key.
Yeah. So let's just jump right into a conversation about your book, if we can. In your book, Christian Hospitality and Muslim Immigration in the Age of Fear, you outline that the attitudes around immigration, particularly as it relates to Muslim immigration, tends to hang out on one or another end of a binary. It's either sort of a hard and absolute no, sort of exclusivism, this sort of higher walls, characterized by higher walls, or on the other end, sort of open doors, which is, sort of like open immigration, bring people in. You're advocating in this book a third way, which you call Christian pluralism. I wonder if you can help our listeners and viewers now understand a little bit more about what that looks like. What is, help describe for us a Christian pluralist.
Absolutely. So first of all, the important thing to say here is that the issue of Muslim immigration in the West, in Europe and North America, is an extremely complex issue. And there is no simple, easy answer. And anyone attempting to give you a simple, easy answer to this question, you should have a critical, cynical eye towards them. And so I'm not going to do that today.
Good.
But what I would say is, yes, the emphasis tends to be in public debates about Muslim immigration a bit of a binary, in which Muslims are either an existential threat to the West that needs to be solved through forceful and a strong Western response, or Muslim immigrants represent sort of a quaint culture that can be folded into a sort of diverse, multicultural nirvana. And all we need to do is simply accept and love them, and everything will be okay. And we can sing together, and there won't be any real challenges. Now, I'm obviously oversimplifying the debate, but those are sort of the two strong voices. And what I propose is a third way, and it's not sort of a moderate position in between the two. It's not a little bit of one and a little bit of the other, but it really is an alternative way of seeing the problem. And I should add that both of those sides tend to see Muslim immigrants as something that the government needs to handle on behalf of the citizen. And so one side asks the government to be strong against Muslims. The other side asks the government to be nice to Muslims. And in general, it looks to the state to solve the problem of Islam, as if Islam is a problem that needs to be solved, or a question that needs to be answered through government action. So in general, what Christian pluralism argues is that we as Christians are living in a society of deep and profound difference, in which people come into the public square with very different ideas about what the common good is. Christians have real disagreements with Muslims. We also have real disagreements with modern atheists and Buddhists and communists and capitalists. We all have different understandings of the common good. And so, first of all, is simply to name that there are deep differences, and that these differences are not going away anytime soon. The second thing is to argue that fundamental to the Christian perspective is that of loving our neighbor and making space, generous space, for those differences. So I want to make generous space for my Muslim neighbors to flourish and to make their argument for the common good. This does not mean that I affirm their argument for the common good or that I agree with it, but that I want a public square where they can make their case for what Canada and the United States should be, and I can make a case as well. And of course, it's much more complicated than that, but this is a position that's often called principled pluralism, which is my Christian principles that I am not willing to negotiate about. Those are firm for me.
Right.
Those principles demand that I make generous space for others.
Right.
even space that I don't like.
Yeah, well, see, there's the interesting rub, isn't it? So, what was one of the things that was very compelling to me in your book is the position that you come from, because I mean, we read some of this stuff, and I've done some of this work. My own education was around living out the baptismal covenant in a pluralistic reality, and how we can better honor that by being in right relationship with others. And what I found when I did my research was that, in fact, if you took a group of people who had some negative attitude towards the other, once they had opportunity to be in relationship and break bread together and do things together and get engaged, they didn't have to give up their baptismal promises. In fact, they came closer to them by actually living in that public space with others and hearing what they had to say, even disagreeing with it, but actually understanding that they were still soccer moms, and they were still, they were still on the PTA, and they still did all that stuff. And so one of the things that I thought was compelling as coming from your perspective is just where you're at theologically in terms of being in a Reformed church, Christian Reform of North America, I think is what you said. So sometimes, we can pick up scholars who write this stuff who come from a sort of very progressive, mushy sort of place where the edges are fuzzy about whether what they believe, what they don't believe. It's almost universal. You clearly don't come from that perspective. You clearly have some very strong theological foundation upon which you build this argument. And that to me was very compelling, and perhaps stronger than we would know even in the Anglican Church in Canada. But I was really compelled by it. So I just wonder if you'll say more about that in terms of your own theological underpinning and what it is that and the parts that are non-negotiable in terms of these, and it's because of these that I want to be in relationship.
Yeah. So I am sort of existing in countering the more liberal Christian view that would want to say something like there are no meaningful, important differences between Islam and Christianity. We are sort of different ways up the same mountain. We are all praying to the same God. And the important thing is really just to emphasize our commonness and sort of paper over any differences.
Right.
And on the other side is a more fundamentalist Christian approach, which would look to either dominate other religions through the use of political power to sort of impose Christianity on others, or to say the world is lost. We are going to huddle up in our own little fundamentalist circle, and we're not going to engage those differences. Yeah. So you either dominate the difference, or you run away from the difference, or you kind of assimilate into the difference. You
ignore the difference.
Yeah, you ignore it. Yeah. And so my position comes from a belief that Christ is sovereign over the world, that Christ alone is the king. And Christ demands that I make space for those that I disagree with. And it's Christ who saves people. It is Christ who is sovereign over the government. And Jesus does not need me to save Muslims. He doesn't need me to take America back for him. Jesus is not weak. And so I don't need to fix Muslims for him. I have a responsibility to be engaged in public life, but I don't enter it with a sense of fear that it all rests on me, that God needs me to fix the world.
Yeah. It sounds to me like this is the work of a disciple, the work of a follower, isn't it? That's what I'm hearing you say and advocating around. That's our work is to say not to save everybody other than ourselves, but to create space for them. Full disclosure, I haven't read the book, but what I wanted to ask was, do you talk at all about what that work might look like for Christians today in order to create that space of hospitality, or that center space for people to engage in some of these conversations?
Oh, we lost you, Matthew. You're muted.
Sorry, guys.
Yep.
There is a whole chapter in the book called Pluralism in Action. What does this look like in action?
10 things.
And, I'm sorry?
There were 10 things, I believe, weren't there?
Yeah, so that's sort of the last chapter, specifically written for evangelicals in the United States and North America. But there's another chapter that simply looks at different Christians and how they are responding to Muslim immigration. Now, typically, books like mine would call for political action. So Christians should call their politicians, and Christians should politically organize, and they should protest and run for office and things like that. So typically a book like mine would call simply for political action. And while that is good and important, I try to argue that Christian hospitality in this moment is much broader than that. It calls for Christian teachers who are teaching in classes with Muslim students. They have a task there for being hospitable to their students. Christian doctors who are caring for Muslim women who are giving birth. There are questions as to how you might demonstrate hospitality to your Muslim neighbor there. Christian professors and administrators of schools, making space for Muslim prayer rooms or things like this. Christian business leaders who have employees who are Muslims. So a Christian response to Muslim immigrants is not simply a political one, but as we live and work and play and study alongside our Muslim neighbors, we all have a role to play in thinking about what exactly Jesus is calling us to in relationship to our Muslim neighbors. We don't simply ask our politicians to fix this issue for us or to make it go away.
So because that, like you said, it feeds into that idea that the government or the politicians have some work to do to solve this, right? So if we're going back to them and saying, what are you going to do about it? That, pushes that narrative a bit.
Right. So for me, I think when you talk about the teacher or the administrator we also talk about the politician, right? So it's the politician who's going to live out her own discipleship that might be able to do that. The metaphor that you use or the image that you use that I really liked in terms of coming back against the two binaries or against the binary of high walls or open doors is a very luxurious table. I really like that image. I don't know if you can say more about that.
Absolutely. So the metaphor of a house is often used when we think about immigration. So on one side of the political spectrum, you have people talking a lot about the need for walls. We need restrictions. We need boundaries. We need walls to keep evil things out and to protect those within. So the emphasis there is on national security and limitation. On the other side, there's an emphasis on opening doors and sort of being people who welcome, and the country needs to let people in. And so those are sort of broadly spoken, those on the right and those on the left. But very little discussion is focused on the table, how we actually sit together around a table once we're inside. The rhetoric of walls can't really help us sit down at a table together. And it ignores the fact that we already have difference inside our house. So we need to figure out how to sit down at the table together. The rhetoric of open doors also can't help us sit down with deep difference. It just allows people in, and it emphasizes openness and generosity, but it can't provide an ethic to really respond to the deep challenges of raw and real difference that the current experiment going on in the world today of Muslims and Buddhists and Christians and socialists and capitalists all trying to live in the same city together peacefully, it's a profound challenge. And trying to paper over that with niceties and romantic statements about multiculturalism is just, it cannot sustain, it can't hold a city together, a deeply diverse city. And so we actually need resources for sitting at that table together. And that brings us to Jesus Christ, who is the host at the table and who teaches Christians how to be people who can sit at a table with deep difference. And we think about Holy Week, right? Having just gone through that, here you have Jesus sitting down at a table with people who are going to betray him, who are going to run away from him, who are not going to be easy friends, and yet he still sits with them. And so I try to develop what I call a table politics, as opposed to a politics of high walls or open doors, but that's something to help Christians think about sitting next to their Muslim neighbors.
That's great. It's a great segue, Matthew, because I wanted to ask you, you're mentioning Holy Week. Wanted to ask you about a article that you wrote regarding that. And I'm really looking forward to getting my teeth into the book over the next week or so if I can get my hands on it here. So that's great. But
Borrow, Gabby.
I can borrow Kevin's. Yeah. I could do that.
No, buy your own.
Buy your own. Yeah, buy your own.
That does Matthew no good, Kevin.
No sharing.
So our focus on our podcast is the intersectionality of faith in the public square, and we try to look at that often when we chat. And we've just come through Holy Week and Easter. We're in the middle of the Easter season now. So I read your article for Justice Review, which was titled "Refugees and the Politics of Holy Week." And you ask this question: in the light of Holy Week, how should Christians respond to the refugee crisis? And you make the audacious assumption that Holy Week, rightly understood, has political implications. By reframing the question of how the Christian should respond to the refugee crisis, to specifically ask how the Holy Week journey might shed a little bit of light on the response. And it was brilliant. I really got a lot out of that. So I wonder if you could walk our listeners just briefly through Holy Week with that question as kind of the compass on the walk through the streets of Jerusalem. You started kind of talking a little bit about what was happening with the celebration of the Palms and Palm Sunday, and then moving to the upper room and the Mount of Olives and Golgotha. Can you walk us through that?
Yeah, well, I think I'll try to be brief here and simply say that Holy Week, in a nutshell, is a story of hospitality, little moments in which Christ makes space for others amidst deep pain, difficulty, and fear. Even in that small encounter when he's being arrested, someone has come to bind him and take him away, and there's fear and there's darkness and there's shouting, and even there he reaches out an unarmed hand to heal, even in that moment. And so you have little episodes like that throughout Holy Week in which Christ is making space, is a healing presence in a time of fear and frustration and uncertainty. And these debates about Muslim immigration, these debates about Syrian refugees, the feelings of anxiety and fear and frustration and isolation are all through that. But ultimately, while we have these little moments of hospitality, the week itself culminates in the cross. And the cross, in and of itself, if it is anything, it is God opening his arms to a broken world. And so when I say that Holy Week has public implications, this is what I mean. God has made profound space for me, even when I was his enemy, even when I was far off, even when I wanted nothing to do with him. He made space for me. And that space making that happens on the cross has implications for my life. It means that I need to make space for others, even those who do not accept me or my faith, or who may even be at odds with me. I have been recruited into a mission of hospitality. Christ has purchased me. He has bought me to be a part of his mission of hospitality. And so if I accept his hospitality and do not show it to others, then I'm denying, I'm turning my back on Holy Week and on the cross and what happened there. So that's what I mean when I say the cross has public and political implications, is that I'm part of this kingdom of hospitality.
And as you said, right through Holy Week, there are these instances where we see that. One of my favorites that was so moving to me and really opened my eyes up on this was at the beginning of Holy Week, the idea of Jesus entering into Jerusalem, and everybody's all excited about this new thing that's going to happen. And we're all on board because, the kingdom is coming and the Messiah is here, and everybody's excited with palms. And then within a day or two, things start to get a little heavy, and some real work has to be taking place, and heads are butting. And we know the story that after a couple of days, everybody just takes off. And in that space, what was powerful for me is in that space thinking, we all love the idea of having these new relationships and new worlds that we're going to build. But when it comes down to doing the actual work, as we've been talking about, oftentimes we turn and want to run from that because it's going to be hard, it's going to be difficult, and it's going to get messy. And I saw that in the whole light.
Oh yeah, that's very well said. And I think that's exactly what we see happening in the Netherlands, which I discuss in my book, which is during the 1990s in the Netherlands, there is this sort of loving embrace of Muslim immigration and sort of romantic ideal of a multicultural, multi-religious society in which everything is going to be great. And Muslims are going to be tremendous citizens within our diverse society, and it's all going to be wonderful. But the actual raw reality, the difficulty of living with this deep, deep difference all around you, it pushes against you, and it's hard. And sometimes there are real costs and real pains involved. And left-wing multiculturalism, as we have seen in the Netherlands, can't sustain you through those deep difficulties. It can't, I would argue, it cannot hold a society together through the sorts of challenges like 9/11 and others. Kumbaya can't keep you going.
It's interesting you say that, because I was just thinking as you were saying that about the Canadian experience. So after young Alan Kurdi washed up on the beach in Greece, and it shocked the world, that image of a 4-year-old drowned on the beach. I was stirred by it. I stood before my congregation that Sunday and apologized and said, look, I'm a leader in this community, and I've done nothing. I've known there's a bloody war going on there for 4 years. What have I been doing? What are we going to do about this? And the community that I belong to here raised $30,000 in 10 days to sponsor 2 families. And so we subsequently did that work. Interesting, what happened though was at the same time that was happening, is we brought what was originally going to be 30,000 turned into 58,000 Syrians came to Canada. Many of them, more than half, sponsored by church groups, community groups, and so on. But the other portion of that were people who were on a government sponsorship. So no relationship, no involvement with anything, but here's your hotel for the next month till we find you a house. Here's your house. Figure out your stuff. Hopefully you can find a doctor, the dentist, all the stuff that you need. And we got involved with a couple of those families, particularly right now in the last couple of years, some Yazidi women who've come over, and they had no support. And the difference is shocking, right? So in the 2 families that we settled, we had all these things that were very difficult to deal with at the beginning, where a hand was extended and the Muslim man wouldn't shake it, right? And the Christian woman who was extending it in generosity had to feel that and go, oh, wait a minute, this hurts a little bit, right? This stings. But over the course of 2 years, we really became close to these families. And when the shooting happened in Sainte-Foy, Quebec, in a mosque, we gathered people over on the over on the steps of the mosque the next morning. And that was near the end of our sponsorship agreement. And what was most endearing to me was to see that same woman with one of those Muslim men in an embrace in the rotunda under the dome, embracing each other, weeping. And that came out of real Christian discipleship on one hand, and a Muslim family being listened to and taught to hear about their faith. We've learned about them. They've learned about us. We know how we differ, but we've come together. And instead of like this, we've come together. So it's really, to me, that image that Rob spoke of there of doing the work. Yeah, it's not pretty some days, but it's worth it if you're willing to prevail through it. And it's not a secular sort of, here's your keys, go sit in your house. It's, you know what, we have something to say, Christians. We have something to say, and we have something to do, and we don't need to run away, cut and run. Sorry, that was a rant. Matthew.
Amen.
Perfect. Ian, did you have a question you wanted to ask Matthew?
I did. So Kevin, Rob, and myself were reflecting last night about our lived experiences. And I'm just out of high school last year. And I was in a school that was very multicultural and probably, as you would describe it, pluralistic is the correct word. And in my world, diversity is not really an issue. The old guys over here, these two chuckles, remember when they were my age, these things were more of an issue. And in the meantime, our friends in Quebec are trying to pass a law called Bill C-23, which bans public service employees from wearing religious symbols. While it is to cover all religious symbols, most have seen this as an outright attack on Muslim immigrants, particularly Muslim women who wear the hijab. And you wrote a great piece for Cardis, I believe the website was called, The Headscarf, Islam's Gift to Western Democracy. It really asks the reader to consider what democracy is all about. And I wanted to know what you would say to our friends over in Quebec who feel that hijab should be banned.
That's great. So you have just asked an American to comment on Canadian politics.
That's right.
Yeah. Reverse the roles a little bit.
Let's be clear about what I'll be really careful not to make specific comments about Quebec in that law. First of all, because I'm not a part of Quebec or know the specific details about that law. But really, it's not a new or original idea to Quebec. In fact, this comes out of and this has been long discussed in France, on how to deal with headscarves and things. And these debates, headscarves are discussed all over Europe and North America in a variety of different ways. Some people frame Muslim headscarves as symbols of female oppression. Some see it as symbols of religious oppression. Others of them see it as a security risk. So having a burqa on a bus, it's sort of framed as a security risk. Others see it as sort of an imposition on a Christian culture from a different religion. So there's lots of different ways in which headscarves show up in these debates, and it tends to be a lightning rod for any kind of discussion about Muslim presence in the United States because it's so profoundly public. And in the modern West, for the past few hundred years, there has been a push for religions to become private values. Religion is something you do in the privacy of your own room or your own closet or your own church or mosque or synagogue. And that's the proper place for religion. And the assumption is that religion is a dangerous thing, and that if it's allowed to come out into public, we will fight with one another. And religion is it's irrational, it's violent, it's oppressive, whereas modernity and modern secularism is rational, it's scientific, it's peaceful. And so when we're in the public square, we should all behave as if we are modern secularists, and keep our religion private. And the assumption is that if we behave like modern secularists, we will just be generous, democratic, tolerant people. So all of this emerges from a Western assumption that religion is backwards and dangerous, and secularism is forward-thinking and progressive and peaceful and generous. And so it really does come out of that deep history. And which brings us to the headscarf, finally, and why I'm thankful for its presence. Now, what does that mean for a Christian to say they're thankful for a Muslim headscarf? Well, it's essentially this. I, as a Christian in the West, am tempted to privatize my faith. I am tempted to become anonymous in the public square. I am tempted to try to fit in. I don't want to be set apart. I don't want to be pointed at. And so I always have that kind of temptation. When I encounter a headscarf, a woman wearing a headscarf in the public square, I'm challenged in a number of ways. I'm challenged to think to myself, am I willing to be public with my faith? Am I willing not to fit in? Am I willing even to suffer or be ridiculed for my faith or to be set apart? And furthermore, she in herself, simply by wearing that headscarf, is challenging how my culture thinks about sexuality, about possessions, about consumerism and fashion, about any number of things. She's challenging the status quo in the way that I, as a Christian, may not want to do. And so her mere presence is humbling to me in that way. And democracy depends upon people being honest and open and public with their perspectives. And she's doing that. And often I am not. And so that's sort of how I think about those things. There's more to say, but that's sort of in general. How does that hit you there, Ian? What do you think?
Yeah. Yeah.
Are you buying what I'm selling?
Yeah, I definitely am. Like yeah.
You're picking up what he's laying down?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm smelling what you're stepping in.
Salty.
I love the perspective because what you're saying is it's not about the religion, it's about the democracy.
Mm-hmm.
We're looking at it through a different lens here. We're making it all about the fact that it's a religious symbol or whatever. We're not seeing it on the broader scope of this is about who we are choosing to be as a democratic society and what we can look like.
And of course, it's what you and I talk about all the time on this podcast, Rob. I mean, it's this notion that faith has a voice in the public square,
Right.
and we have something important to bring to the public square, something important to say. And you're quite right that she, with her headscarf, with her hijab, is a reminder to the public square that we have a voice and something important to be said. So, yeah. And that's very profound, Ian.
Yeah. So I was flipping through Twitter last night, and I saw a little discussion going on between Kevin and another person on Twitter, and Matthew jumping in too a little bit with this one. So, Kevin, why don't you set that up? Let us know what was going on Twitter last night.
Yeah. So I tweeted a few quotes from Matthew's book, and my in summation, I tweeted a photo of the book and saying people should read this. This is an important voice right now for faith in the public square. And it would appear that my own exuberance for your work, Matthew, caught the attention of a couple folks in the Netherlands. Anyway, without going into all of it, I can sum up basically what came back at me like this. Good book. I'm a pluralist, but there are limits. And we are doing all the work of being pluralist, and we are doing all the work, but they being the Muslims, And I was trying to draw that out by saying, who is the deep-pocketed state that you're talking about? Is it the Netherlands, or is it Turkey, and so on? Which is what they were talking about. But they are not reciprocating, and they got deep pockets to fight against us. And so they're saying that Kaemingk doesn't acknowledge these limits or discuss them. And so I just and I really liked your final tweet back, which was read the book again, but slower. But anyway, which is great. But I wonder if you can say more about those limits and answer that pushback.
Sure, absolutely. And I think those commenters were informed by a book review that was written in First Things that really misconstrued the book and argued essentially that I don't have any limits, and I don't set any limits for pluralism, which just fundamentally misses very important parts of the book.
Yeah.
So first on limits. Yes, there are absolutely limits to living in a democratic society and to being a part of a pluralistic society. And those quite simply are following the law. And so laws should be enforced. And not simply because it's practical, but honestly, because if society is not safe and if society is not orderly, you cannot be a hospitable culture. Because what happens when people are not safe, when there is no order, is they tighten up. Citizens have their posture gets like this, right? And there's no space for exchange and for hospitality. People keep their doors shut. And so law and order is absolutely crucial. It's a baseline, and I say that quite clearly in a number of different points. But that's not important. So yes, absolutely, limits matter, and I outline those. The other thing that I heard you say that we could talk a little bit about is this sense that Muslims aren't reciprocating.
Yes.
Or they won't reciprocate.
That's right.
I also hear this sometimes phrased like this. In Muslim countries, Christians are treated terribly. So we should not treat Muslims positively when they come to us.
As spoken by Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount.
Yes. Yeah. So, I mean, it's hard to take those statements seriously from a Christian. It makes sense from someone else, but the sort of belief that things need to be reciprocated in order for us to demonstrate love and justice is just antithetical to the gospel. But also, democracy itself is always going to have agents and actors within it who disagree with it fundamentally. That will always be the case. And it's an important part of democracy, actually, that it is regularly challenged by those who disagree with it. And a healthy democracy does not behave in such a fragile way that it needs to crush minorities who question it. So, in a very important way, I, as a Christian, disagree with some of the fundamental building blocks of liberal democracy. I'll give you an example. I do not believe that the government of the United States is of the people, by the people, and for the people. I believe that the government of the United States exists under the sovereignty of God. Now, I'm still in favor of elections. I'm still in favor of constitutional limits and all of those things. But at its very bottom, I believe that the government of the United States does not belong to the people, but it belongs to God. And so that puts me at some level of tension with the democratic project. But I think it's good for America to have people like me in it, challenging it.
I'm convinced. I'm convinced it is.
And never needed more than now. I throw that caveat in there as well. And Matthew, that leads us into, we're coming near the end here, but we can't let you go before we ask. We brought up the government. You're certainly living in a unique time in the United States right now. We wanted to ask you a little bit about what it is like to be advocating for Christian pluralism in the age of Donald Trump. I mean, we watch it up here as much as anybody around the world, and we've seen open hostility toward foreigners, the Muslim ban, a lot of support for him from the Christian right. You kind of feel like you're swimming upstream now that you're in the midst of this context, and how are you managing all that?
Yeah, well, it is a fascinating time to be writing and speaking about Muslim immigration in the United States. It really is. And so for the most part, I really embrace it and I enjoy the challenge. And so as a scholar and a teacher, it is a fun time to be thinking about pluralism. It is heartbreaking to see Christians going along with these things, of course. That's hard. But I do enjoy engaging with them in thoughtful discussion. So I teach at Fuller Theological Seminary, which is a multi-denominational evangelical seminary. And so we have students from all over the political spectrum, and we have lots of great discussions about these things. And I would say overall it's very stimulating. I think that here in the United States, there is a generational tension growing within evangelicalism. So older evangelicals versus youngers on these issues of Muslim immigration and the Republican Party and Donald Trump. And I see a growing movement of young evangelicals who no longer find the sort of right-wing nationalism of Donald Trump and the Republican Party appealing. They're ready to jump in with the Democratic Party and the progressive movement either. So there's reason for despair, but there's also reason for hope when we think about, American evangelicals. And there are some exciting new conversations brewing about what does it mean to be a Christian in a pluralistic America as opposed to Christendom, type of America. So, yeah.
Just to follow up on that, part of your book actually touches on this a little bit when you talk about, for the Christian, for the one who's walking in the way of Jesus, the disciple, being disavowed of that need to be a member of the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. I mean, it's largely on the far right been a part of the Republican Party. But to be able to be governed by principles that are broader than either of those two secular institutions embody. So, I always find it from afar watching it fascinating to think that there's a couple of issues that prevail, and it's, abortion and homosexuality seem to be really high on the agenda. War, poverty, welcoming the stranger, the issue at hand here, very low on the agenda. But you do touch on it in the book. You specifically speak to the need for those who profess the name of Jesus to step away from those political allegiances in order to embrace our citizenship with Jesus.
Absolutely. I mean, it's important for faithfulness. It's always it's also a much more interesting way to live.
Right.
Than sort of falling in line with one or two parties. It's a bit of calling Christians to a more robust political imagination.
Yes. Beyond
one or two issues, actually exploring the goodness of God for all of life and seeing that no political party can capture the complex beauty of God or his justice or his flourishing for creation and for our lives. And so part of my challenge as a teacher is illuminating the beauty of gospel-centered politics in such a way that the politics of these two parties looks dull in comparison to the politics of God.
Right. And if lawmakers were prepared to embrace their own discipleship, there and here and everywhere else, in terms of the way you talk about it in this book, then those will be the things that will govern how decisions are made and how laws are made. And it wouldn't be, the agenda of big oil or pharma or, whatever other outfit is lobbying Washington or Ottawa tomorrow. It would be, as the guy said on Twitter to me last night, that he's a dual citizen, that we're dual citizens. We belong to God and we belong to the state. I said, I'm not a dual citizen. I'm a resident alien most of the time is what I feel like. Stanley Hauerwas talked about that. I know where my citizenship is, and sometimes here I feel very much like a resident alien. So how do I come to speak to that? And that is a powerful way to identify with the immigrant, with the one who comes in. If we realize, and I think that that's really at the heart of what you're talking about, that with the headscarf conversation, for instance, it is reminding us that our values are not modern or postmodern secular liberal values. That's not who we are. We may have some things we like about that. There may be some things about it we don't like, but our citizenship is rooted, our baptism is rooted, our expression of faith is rooted in this peasant Jewish cynic, and our willingness to follow in his way, who lived, who healed, lived, died, and rose again. And if we're prepared to embrace that, then we have the opportunity to make some difference. It's why your book is so great. So let me just say one last time, here it is, folks. It's Christian Hospitality and Muslim Immigration in an Age of Fear. You can order it on Amazon. You can order it on Chapters. If you live in a city with a local bookseller like we do here in London, I'll make a plug here for Oxford Books over on Piccadilly. You can phone Mark or Hillary over there, the owners who still have that small book room, and they'll order this book for you and drop it on your doorstep when they get it. In the days of COVID-19. So I'm a big fan of supporting our local booksellers because they're all fighting to stay alive too. But all these folks can get you Matthew's book. Are you working on another one, Matthew?
I am, yeah.
Tell us about your next project.
My other area of research is faith in the marketplace, and specifically faith and work. And so I'm really interested in and I have a new book project coming out about the connection between work and worship. And so many of us who work in the world experience a sort of disconnect between our working lives and our worshiping lives in the sanctuary. And so that book is all focused on how we can live a life of deeper connection between our daily labor and our liturgy. Wow. And all of the ways in which we can carry our work from the week with us into the sanctuary and carry it before God, and how the sanctuary and how Sunday morning can propel us out into the week to continue our worship throughout our work, throughout our week. So that's the next book that's coming up. It's available for pre-order right now, but it officially comes out in the fall.
Its title?
It's called Work and Worship, Reconnecting Our Labors and Liturgies. So it's heavy on the alliteration.
Very good. That makes me want to get the book at a time when we're back in our sanctuaries, because we've been missing being in them for a while, but that would be a perfect segue into that. So again, Matthew, thanks so much for taking the time. We really appreciate it and all the work that you're doing, and wish you and your family all the safety and health in these difficult times. Hope you're well, and hopefully we'll be able to chat again down the road.
Thank you.
Good, thanks. You've been listening to the Vicars Crossing podcast, brought to you by our good friends at A. Miller George Funeral Home, where each life is celebrated, and their sister company, Cremation London and Middlesex, both family-owned and operated. And so, boys, until we get together again next time, I'm Rob Henderson from Holy Trinity St. Stephen's here in London.
Kevin George from St. Aidan's in London.
I'm Ian from my bedroom.
Okay. And he's Matthew Kaemingk, and make sure you get out and get that book, folks, okay? Take care, and we'll see you next time at the Vicars Crossing. And hey, Kevin, remember to always look both ways.
Before you cross the street.